So welcome to week 2 for the blog post videos. I just got done hiking up a mountain in Utah with my friends and it's very beautiful. Just to give you guys a context for why I'm probably looking a little dirty, but I wanted to make sure I got this video out. And I hope you guys enjoy the content, and I will talk to you next time.
This week we talked about avoiding cognitive distortions, which involved all or nothing in mental filtering, disqualifying the positives and jumping to conclusions, as well as emotional reasoning and overly rigid rule keeping. Cognitive distortions can be considered slips in our thinking that we all make at times. They are a derivative of cognitive behavioral therapy. The main premise behind them is that your thoughts have an enormous impact on your emotions and the way you are feeling. So if you're feeling terrible, there's a big chance that you are thinking in an unhelpful way. These unhelpful thinking styles cause us to jump to incorrect conclusions, make incorrect assumptions, and much more. All or nothing thinking is an extreme type of thinking that often leads to extreme emotions and behaviors. When we utilize this unhealthy thinking style, we see things on the extreme ends of a spectrum. For example, either you view yourself as perfect or as a failure. There is no in between. Another example is either you are depressed or you are on top of the world. Again, there is no in between. Unfortunately, it is a very easy thing to fall into. Here, I will use a situational example. Imagine that you have decided that you are no longer going to consume alcohol or other drugs. You are doing well for 2 weeks and end up giving in and drinking a beer. All or nothing thinking would lead you to presume that this is it and that you should just go back to drinking alcohol and doing other drugs. To overcome this cognitive distortion, you can utilize a strategy known as both and reasoning. By thinking this way, you are able to reason with yourself mentally. Specifically, you can allow yourself to realize that two seemingly opposite things can exist together. You can both succeed in your goal to ultimately remain sober and have a slip-up or two. That is to say, I am not saying that drinking alcohol and or doing other drugs is a good idea when you are seeking sobriety, but if you have a slip-up, it is not the end. You can recover. Mental filtering occurs when we focus solely on the negative aspects of situations without considering the positive aspects. When this happens, our current circumstances can be completely fulfilled with a single negative detail. For example, you believe you are a failure, so your natural tendency is to focus on the mistakes you have made and not consider your success or accomplishments. Building on our previous cognitive distortion, another example would be focusing only on the fact that you drank that beer, not considering that you were able to remain sober for 2 whole weeks. To overcome this cognitive distortion, you should take time to really collect factual evidence that contradicts what you are feeling down about. When doing this, make sure that you are not looking at the situation using the same negative lens that resulted in you feeling this way in the first place. Look at the evidence through the lens of, I am not a failure. Another example that might be salient at this time is considering the facts about your current situation related to the coronavirus. Ask yourself, are you healthy? Is your family healthy? Are you doing everything you can to ensure that you all remain safe? Ask, am I alone in this situation? Answer these questions. Those are all facts. Disqualifying the positive refers to processing information in a biased way, specifically seeing everything in a negative lens. It is a mental process that transforms any positive into something to be considered as neutral or negative in your mind. When we see things through a negative lens that continues to disqualify the positive things don't count because of some made-up rule in our minds. Like, I got lucky, anyone could do that, and that doesn't count because, well, insert up the made-up rule. For example, consider getting compliments for your performance at work. Rather than accepting that you did a good job, you would think, well, he or she are just saying that. Or, yeah, I got lucky. Another example would be that you finally made it to 90 days sober and think, well, that doesn't really count because anybody could do that. Rather than feeling positive about yourself and your achievements, you end up feeling cynical and disappointed. There are 2 central strategies we can use to combat this unhelpful thinking. First, we can practice accepting compliments and allowing ourselves to acknowledge our strengths. We can do this by paying attention to our responses to positive information and practicing acknowledging positive aspects about ourselves and others. Second, we can change our language. For example, rather than saying, "I got lucky," you would say, "I'm getting this compliment because I worked hard and earned it." Jumping to conclusions typically includes one of two things, either mind reading or fortune telling. When we mind read, we make assumptions about how others perceive us. When we fortune tell, we anticipate the worst possible outcome and accept it immediately as fact. In either case, we are making negative interpretations or predictions with any concrete evidence to support our conclusions. For example, consider walking into a meeting and seeing two people having a private conversation. If you are mind reading, you would think, "They are definitely talking about me." An example of fortune telling would be thinking that you are definitely going to get the coronavirus because other people in the state have it. To combat this unhealthy thinking style, we should consider all of the evidence that is available to us. For example, what is the evidence you would have for knowing that those people were talking about you when you walked into your meeting? What are the facts related to someone acquiring the coronavirus? Just because people are having a private conversation does not mean they are talking about me. Just because other people have the coronavirus in my state does not mean I am going to get it. Emotional reasoning leads us away from thinking rationally. It refers to situations when we begin to depend solely on our feelings as a guide for our thoughts and behavior. For example, consider your significant other has been staying out late frequently from work. The main feeling that manifests in this situation is suspicion. Based on your feeling of suspicion related to your significant other's behavior, you conclude that they are meeting someone on these evenings. Or suppose you feel embarrassed about something you recently did. Based on your feelings of embarrassment, you conclude that you are stupid. In each case, you are basing your conclusions on your current emotional state. We can do several things to combat this unhealthy thinking style. We can start paying attention to our thoughts. Start paying attention when certain feelings begin to manifest. Remember that basing our conclusions on our feelings is not always the most appropriate way to measure reality, particularly when we are not in the best emotional state. We can consider how we might view the situation if we were in a calmer state. At this point, we can consider whether there is any concrete evidence that supports our interpretation of our feelings. Is there any factual evidence that suggests that we should be upset about this situation? Overly rigid rule keeping refers to assigning overly rigid rules to the way we believe we should behave, others should behave, or how a situation should turn out. When we assign overly rigid rules to another's behavior, we will often become angry when they do not conform to our rules. When we assign overly rigid rules to our behavior, we will often become guilty when we do not conform to the rules. When we assign overly rigid rules to our expectations of how something should turn out, we are often left feeling disappointed when our expectations have not been met. Using terms like should and must are typically great indicators that we are utilizing this unhealthy thinking style. These statements provide insight into the standards we uphold and the things we expect from others, ourselves, and situations. Of course, these standards can be helpful. However, they can also lead to unrealistic expectations that we or other people will find difficult to uphold. These overly rigid rules that we place on ourselves, others, and situations typically mean that we have not adapted to reality as well as we could. For example, you might believe that you must have the approval of others, or you think that others should never let you down. Maybe you think that the meeting you go to tomorrow should be one of the most inspirational meetings you have ever been to. In each of these cases, if the expectations of your overly rigid rules are not upheld, you will be left feeling guilty, angry, or disappointed. We can combat this unhealthy thinking style by adopting flexible preferences related to our expectations of ourselves, others, and situations. Rather than making demands on ourselves, others, and situations, we can pay attention to the words we are using. For example, I approve the approval of others. I wish no one would let me down. My meeting tomorrow could be one of the most inspirational meetings I have ever been to. Of course, we would prefer all these things, but are they reality? Will everything still be fine if they don't happen? We can also remember that the world doesn't always play by our rules. Everyone has their own rules they live by. No matter how much you value your rules, others in your life may not place the same value on them. Of course, keep your standards, preferences, and ideals, but try to remove your overly rigid rules of others, yourself, and situations.